Hi, I'm Tantum, and today I want to share my mixing process with you for the track I made for Production Music Live using mainly the new sounds from Jonas Sandbach's sample pack. I will show you how I approach mixing, so I will guide you through the mixing process of all individual sounds and buses, and we will get from this to this. This is the sound design session we've worked on earlier, and I will go through each sounds. I usually have a kind of like a top-down mixing approach, so I will start with the drums, then bass, and then synths. And for me, usually that's the process because I think club music is percussion heavy, bass heavy, so those are the sounds I take care of first. And yeah, so let's start. We have the drums group here. And I will usually start adjusting the kick drum. So this is also kind of the priority I'm using. It's like kick drum, clap, hi-hat, and then all the rest, groove, loops, shakers, stuff like this. So let's start with adding an EQ to the kick drum and just the sound. So in this case, the kick drum is maybe a bit boomy, a bit loud. So it just sweep through the audio spectrum and filter out some of the parts I don't like so much. Turn on oversampling. And this, for me, makes this kick sound a bit more focused. Less boomy. It still has a lot of bottom end, but that's okay for now. Let's continue with the clap sound. I have a lot of effects here already. I've mentioned on the overview of the project, but this is all kind of like sound design tools. Compressor just to make it more snappy with a long attack. So for this clap sound, I just want to focus it a bit because it's very stereo sounding, so I'm going to use a utility to reduce the width. I don't want to have it full mono, so I'm adjusting it to a bit narrower sound. And let me adjust the volume. Right, so now we have the kick and the clap running. Let's add in the hi-hat. It's usually a good idea if you stay in a group to not mix sounds individually. So what I do is I started with the kick and then I'm stacking all the sounds on top of each other. So what can happen if you adjust them individually in solo? I feel the balance sometimes is easy to get out of control. So I will leave these sounds running. Add an EQ here. And I'm adjusting, so this sample has a lot of, for a hi-hat, it has not so much high-end, so I'm boosting it a bit. And cutting kind of the lower-ish frequencies of it. Always turn on oversampling. So here's without the EQ. Here's with. I did this because it sounds a bit more snappy. As I said, it's got quite a lot of low frequency content, so I kind of tilted it around. Just using a standard Ableton EQ. Next up we have a shaker. This one sounds quite alright already. Also has a lot of low frequencies, so I'm just cutting it a bit in this case. Volume seems to be okay. And then we have this shaker loop I've built. And for this sound, it also seems to have quite a lot of lower frequencies for a hi-hat, so I want to introduce some high top end here, which is not present in the original sample. So I'm going to use erosion, standard Ableton effect, and I'm using it to introduce some noise, just plain white noise. And I'm tweaking the parameters just by ear. So now you can hear it sounds a lot more shaky, white noisy. And as you can see, it also introduces a lot of low frequencies, so I will cut it with an EQ. Maybe something like this. And bring in the other sounds. Now this sound is playing a polyrhythm, so sometimes it will overlap with the kick. So what I want to do here is use a compressor to sidechain it to the kick to bring out the groove more. If it just sits on top, you have like an awkward syncopation. So I'm just using the standard compressor and sidechain input from our kick here. 3 should be, and bringing down the threshold. So I'm gonna turn those off for now. Leave just those two playing. You can hear now it's really pumpy. And for sidechaining, I usually prefer the peak compression mode. So let's see what it sounds like this. It's a bit subtle, but it just ducks when the kick is hitting, and it leaves more volume for the offbeat. And since it's just a single sample that's being repeated, this makes it more sound like a shaker, a bit more organic, like played by hand. I think it sounds quite good already, so let's bring in the other sounds. It's a bit loud. Add more compression to bring it down even more. And adjust the volume. So I like doing this using the arrow keys. In case you don't know, it's 1 dB increments up or down. And I feel like 2 to 4 dB is usually a good starting point to check if a sound is too loud. I will bring it up or down that amount. So this is working for me right now. And like I told you, I kind of mix top down. So I have these buses here, and I will start with the individual tracks. And later when I have the individual tracks set, like for the drums now, I will continue to next bus. And later I will do bus processing on all of them. I like to keep it simple, not too much. But yes, it's something to do later when the groups have been set up already. And then you can do like the fine tuning in the end. All right, so on to the bass group. So I have a loop playing here. This bass sound is kind of like my main bass for this track. I think the volume of it is okay for now. And when I bring in this one, they're kind of biting each other, so let me bring an EQ in here. So my general idea of mixing is a spatial thing, right? So if you imagine you're setting up like a virtual stage, and to do this we have certain tools, most of which are basically just volume. So to place something in a room, you have volume and room. And it kind of goes hand in hand into each other, because if a sound is close to you, it will be loud. If it's far away, it will be quiet. So you can adjust this by volume. And then you have EQ, which is basically also just volume, but for certain frequencies. You can imagine if you see a concert stage from far away, you will notice that it sounds like muffled. So the high end loses energy quicker than the low end. So you can also shape sounds like this. So I will usually try to do volume first, but most of the time you're going to gonna use an EQ anyway. So you can use this knowledge to place sounds. If something is too bright, it will sound a bit awkward or not real to our ears. Our ears are very good at recognizing room placement, so that's something to really keep in mind. And yeah, in this case, for the bass, I just feel this is like, this scrubby loop is a bit too heavy on the 100 Hertz range maybe, and also there's a lot of low-end junk. So I'm gonna immediately give it a high pass and the low pass. And this already tames the volume a bit. I like the setting for now, but I will bring down the volume here too. And here it's important to keep in mind which element is the focus point. So I want this to be the main bass groove, and this is just for support. So it's okay if it's a bit quieter. Yes, maybe. And then let's check the next sound, which is way too loud. So let me go ahead and adjust some things here. So first of all, we introduced the Haas effect earlier in the sound design stage of this sound. And I already mentioned it's not the best idea for mono compatibility. So I'm gonna grab utility, put it where we left off, and you can, for just a really simple, you can also do this with an EQ, but I like to do it with the utility just to be quick. Set the bass mono. Like, there's no specific rule for this crossover, but higher is better in this case, I think, because the Haas effect is quite intense. So yes, because the Haas effect is quite intense on this one, I put the cutoff quite high at like around 200 Hertz. And you can hear it on headphones really well. On a bigger system like club speakers or speakers in general, this is a quite important step because the separation works differently. The frequencies will mix, so to speak, in the air. You can get away with a lot more separation on headphones because you have an individual speaker on each side. Right, let me also get an EQ in here. All right, let me start off with the high pass. I don't want too much low frequencies in here, so I'm cutting the lows again, especially because we really boosted them before. I'm sure this is considered not best practice, but we are working in 32-bit domain, and I know, so usually the plugins I'm working with, I will know beforehand if they reduce audio quality or if they clip if I'm boosting too much, which is not the case for this EQ. So I can do this, I know it. And yeah, but sometimes you have to be careful, especially with third-party plugins. Sometimes they will like limit the sound if you go over 0 dB, but in this case it will not be a problem, so it's nothing to worry about. Also, we're not clipping too much, so yeah, I'm using this EQ to shape it a bit more. Also, from the bit reduction earlier, we have some high frequency stuff, so I might cut that away because it's unnecessarily harsh, especially when you play it loud. So this also, this already fits in better, in my opinion. So now for all the room things I told you about earlier, you can also, because I want to put this bass in kind of like a different space, because those two are very dry and mono-y, and then I want to have another bass like sitting on top and around the other bass lines to create more separation. So I will do some room adjustments here. So I set up this delay beforehand because I also have a modulation with an LFO here. The reason I did that is I really wanted this sound to sit in a weird way up and around the other bass lines. So I have an LFO modulating the size of this reverb. The rest is pretty much just checking for a sound I like. I chose a spring reverb again because it has a nice weird sound. And if you modulate the size, it has like similar to a delay, like kind of a repitch effect. Sounds really interesting. So let me play it for you. Kind of flutters around. You can also smooth it maybe a bit. Like, you can hear it. It's like a slapbacky sound. And I adjusted the blend a bit to the left because I don't want it to be overwhelming, and then bring down the mix again. For mixing reverb, I have kind of like a rule of thumb, which doesn't work universally, but I like to do it in a way to bring the wet up until you can clearly hear it, and then adjust it down until you can like barely notice it. And I'm trying to find the threshold of where you can notice that there is a room on it, but it shouldn't overwhelm the sound or change it too much. So yeah, it's a matter of fading up and down. It's also kind of like similar to a mixing approach. This is similar to a mixing approach of using analog mixers. You have the fader and you kind of wiggle up and down to just find the right spot. So that's also something you can do with dry wet of reverbs. And then set it to a setting you like, and yeah, leave it there. Now I also, because this is a very sustained bass sound, I want to go ahead and sidechain it to the kick so it doesn't become too muddy. And I will use a multiband EQ for this. Let me put it in front of the reverb. And I will turn off the mid and high bands because I only want to compress the lows, because I like the sustained and brassy kind of sound, but I want to duck it to the kick. So I will just turn on the low band. And I will find the threshold of where I want it to be ducked. Don't want to take away too much, so I think the initial of 120 Hz will work fine for this one. And then it's just a matter of finding the kick and sidechaining to it. And I will need to turn on the kick for this. And bring down the threshold. So I want the bass to duck away when the kick comes. So I will take the right band, put it to the left, and add a ratio like this. So you can already hear the effect. I can exaggerate it by turning it into an expander. So you notice it's immediately like when the kick hit. That's what we're taking away. It's clashing, so we turn it back down again. And there's just a matter of finding the sweet spot. So if you don't pull the threshold far enough down, it will have some clash. And you can usually just adjust this by ear. I will go for a shorter attack and release time because I really just want to dip the kick away. I don't want it to sound too pumpy. Kind of like the 2010 era EDM where everything was pumping so much. I don't like it, so I try to keep it subtle. Then you can bring in the other parts again. And this sounds good to me for now. I will introduce another EQ because sometimes, especially, it doesn't matter so much for like hi-hats or top elements, but if you compress a sound, it will introduce distortion and it might add like low frequency rumble. So it's a good idea for this to just add a high pass at the end. Right, and the auto filter I set up earlier, I will put it afterwards. So now I'm gonna play the drums and the bass together to check the levels. I'm making the brass kind of sound. I'm turning the brass kind of sound up just a bit, because I think it just plays every now and then, so it deserves to be a bit more prominent. Otherwise, I think it sounds awkward if a sound has really extreme distortion or sound design and then it's too quiet. It seems like it's there, but it doesn't want to be there. So that's why I'm keeping this one fairly loud. Maybe adjust the Haas effect on this. So much for the bass. Let's go over to the synths. So here we have the Synth Group, and we have the spectral resonate-y kind of bell loop sound. I don't want this to be a main element, it's just complementing the groove. Also, it's polyrhythmic again, so I think if there's a lot of polyrhythms in this track, I don't want it to be overwhelming. It sounds too complex, maybe to dance to. So I will carve away some of the frequencies here. Also, the spectral resonator might introduce like some harsh resonances, so I will carve on those now with an EQ. So you can hear and even see in the EQ. I don't think it's too good to rely on visuals too much, but yeah, here's obviously a really harsh resonance on the top here. So I'm just filtering it down. Yeah, I'm a big fan of really steep cuts and boosts on EQ. I know it's something people don't like to see, but whatever works is fine. In my opinion, the end product counts, so if it sounds good, it's good. But it's something to consider. Maybe if you have to really do too many changes to a sound, you could consider swapping out the sound source, but for me this is fine, and I'm just using it as a tool. There's too much high frequencies, so I will cut them in whichever way I need to make it sound the way I want. So you can already hear this takes away the harshness and makes the sound a bit more tame, which is what I want from this. The sound also is quite stereo-y, so I just want to bring down the width a bit, not make it completely mono, but also for the lows that are in here, I want to have them in mono, because this is not a sound for me that's supposed to be super wide. It's just complementary for the groove. All the groove elements too, like drums, everything that's important, kick, clap, bass, usually are mono or at least around the center. And this is a groove element too for me. So yeah, I'm using a utility to make it more narrow. Let's check with the other sounds. Definitely need the harsh removal EQ. Let's bring in another EQ. I will high pass it too, because like I said, it's not supposed to be a main element, so we don't need the bass frequencies in here. I'm trying to find the sweet spot of the sound. So around here, there's not really too much playing from other instruments, so I will boost it here. Cut a bit more here, because there's still some nasty, harsh kind of frequencies. Like this maybe. Right, sounds good for me now. So we still have the other elements. Let's go over here. Here I already adjusted the transients using the compressors, which I automated. I want to bring down the volume a bit, because this is also hitting on the two where like the clap is, so it might be a bit clashy. Let me check. Together with the drums. So I like it around here. Same trick like I told you earlier, like just wiggle around with the volume. This is too quiet. This is too loud. So I'll keep it around here. Next we have this one, which is from the loop from the sample pack with the filter. Okay, this sound is quite loud now, so I'm definitely gonna drop in an EQ because I also wanna change some of the frequencies. There's a lot of low frequency stuff in here we don't really need. And it's very like low mid focus, so I wanna give it some space. This sounds too muffled, and you have to always keep in mind what other synths and instruments do you have. Like for example, this is playing around this frequency. We have the bass lines, of course, and also our other sounds. So each sound should have its place. Let's say if you have 5 sounds and they're all really strong at 1 kilohertz, you should maybe consider cutting some of it away to make place just for one element, keep it focused, and give the other elements some space around it or on other frequencies. So I want this sound to be brighter. And yeah, it's really subtle, it's not too strong of an effect. And also, I think there's a bit of effects already on the loop, but I want some more echo. So I will drop in an Ableton delay. So for delays, it can sound really interesting if you unlink the 2 sides. Something like this maybe. Yeah, this, like, just play around, find something that also creates a cool groove maybe, because a delay also can be complementary for the rhythm, like in this case. Can play around with the values. All about trying to find sweet spots and not be afraid to make it sound weird. Because it makes the sound more interesting in my opinion. So if I turn the echo on, it creates a weird kind of warbly sound. And also notice, like I told you earlier, an echo. So if you imagine if a sound is close, it's loud. If it's far away, it's quiet. If something is far away, you will also hear more of the room it's supposed to be surrounded in. So if you add a lot of reverb, it will also put a sound back, or delay. Same here. So you can notice the echo really puts the sound a bit further away. So this is closer. Let's check for the levels with the other elements we have. It's a bit overpowering. Okay, so now for the volume, I put on the other sounds we have already, and this is a bit overpowering still. So I'm scrubbing around until I find a sweet spot. And I'm deciding this is still not, this is just like in background ARP. It's not a main element. So I'm keeping it a bit more on the quiet side for now. And yeah, let's dive right into the main sound. This one's really important. With the patch we made earlier. I also have some parameters I want to automate here. So let me put those in here. So like cutoff, always the classic. I also want to bring up the fine tune right before the drop. So let me just create those automation lanes. Okay, cutoff automation before the drop. Nothing too fancy, simple and classic. Like a tension build towards the drop. Detail sound a tiny bit more interesting and a big reward in the long run. If you listen to a track many times, things like this, in my opinion, make a difference. And I'm using the envelope amount to fade in the sound. It's also something I really like to do at the beginning. I don't want it to play so loud. This will introduce the sound as opposed to starting like this. So I'm not filtering it in with the cutoff, I'm filtering it in with the envelope. This. I will stay around the loop here again for now. Alright, let's go in the effects here. So we already have some room things in here. And there's loads of low frequency energy, so let me bring in an EQ. Obviously cut the lows a bit here, just tame. Like this maybe. The low note, the boom, it interferes a bit too much with the other sounds, so simple high cut and a low attenuation on the lows. Something like this. Now I want to work on the transients a bit. I like using the glue compressor for this, and I don't want it to be affected by the low frequencies because I want it like transient shape it, so we'll put an EQ on here and the higher frequencies, and then just play with really extreme values to find the sweet spot. Just brings the sound together. Really like working with the glue compressor. So why I did this is to bring the transient and everything closer together. Makes it sound a bit more dense. And yeah, also wanna sidechain it to the kick. I mentioned earlier I don't like really pumpy sounds. I think that's a thing of the past. So I will try to just do some really soft compression. Low ratio. So you can see this just helps a bit with ducking the delays and everything, and it makes it stick out more. Because if I have the compressor off, it will kind of wash away with the other sounds. And this just makes the timing and the room this sound has more focused. Now let's bring in the other elements. Maybe still a bit loud. turned it down 2 dB. Sounds good with the rest. Still have this sound here. Let's start right off with an EQ. Remove the low frequency junk. Good idea for a sound like this, especially if it's being heavily modulated. And I don't like the super clicky part, and I like the snappy low kind of part of it. Let's see how it goes with the other sounds. I need to check. There's this particular note I found while sweeping through. I don't like too much, so I'm using a narrow band to get rid of it. And you can see it's getting from this tinny to this bodily sound. So yeah, those two sounds basically we kind of swapped around, if you've noticed. This one got more muffled and this one got brighter. So yeah, mixing is like blending everything together to fit in nicely with each other. It's what mixing should do. That's the goal of mixing, in my opinion. Still not super happy with the sound. I'm gonna try an old trick of mine, spectral resonator on it as well. We're in F here. This kind of just thickens up the sound a bit. And yeah, for me, I want to get away from the tinniness of the sample, so I quite like it this way. Now we still have this group here to take care of. So first of all, let me get into the analog patch again here. So for this sound, I want to compress and distort it a bit further. So let me start off with an EQ, see what's happening here. Definitely can cut away some of the lows because this sound is playing in the mid-range, so we don't need low end here. Also, I feel sometimes the analog kind of has like a harsh-ish sound to it, so I just want to get rid of the high highs. Now let's check with the other elements. The sound kind of gets lost a bit now, so I want to introduce some distortion. So let me find the vinyl distortion. I will use the vinyl distortion for this because I want to switch things up a bit, and I quite like the sound of it. This fattens it up a lot, but it also shifts around the stereo image a bit, so I went ahead and adjusted it here. I also want some compression. Just to reintroduce the transients of the sound. Make it more snappy. And let me bring in reverb here. I'll use the hybrid reverb again. dramatic sound of the initial one actually. So without the reverb, you can notice the sound is really tinny and upfront, and the reverb kind of puts it back again and muffles a bit, which I like in this case. And I think we don't need further volume adjustments on this for now. And bringing in the percussive part of the sound, we still have to take care of that. I think it's quite nice. I really like this sample, just straight from the pack. Didn't change anything about it, no pitch, nothing, but I want it to be in a smaller room, and I don't want to tweak any reverb from scratch now, so let me just find something like this here. Yeah, like this, just a few knob tweaks. I know I want a small room for this because it's like a tinny percussion, so I found this preset here and tweaked it to make it even more small. And then it's just a matter of finding the sweet spot. Not too much, not nothing. So just a bit together. Have it like this. Making this a bit shorter. All right. Synths are good for me now. So let's go over the buses now. I'm not gonna go into the effects. I already set it up and it's really just a few sounds. So let's take a look at the bass, synth and drum bus in this order. Drums first. So for bus processing, I really like to keep it simple. I just wanna, for the drums, if I listen to it, I just wanna bring out the transients a bit. So I'm gonna use a glue compressor again. And I already know I wanna have an EQ on it for sure. So let's see what we have here. And let's bring in the other elements. I definitely want the drums to be a bit more poppy. I'm gonna use the glue compressor for it, again to bring out the transients. So let me check what we have here. I want to use the EQ setting on here because the kick drum is very dominant in this track, and if it's too low or doesn't have an EQ before compression, it will trigger the compressor too easily. I don't want that now. And really go for, if it's easier for you to hear, which for me, I always do this, go for extreme settings first, then tweak the parameters, and then ease it back out. Similar to the reverb, you find the settings you like, and then you take the dry wet down. So in this case, I really want the transients to punch through, so I will increase the attack, so the compressor will react later, so the transient comes through and then it will be ducked, but I want to recover it really fast. So you can go, see if the attack is too short, everything will be eaten up longer. It lets more through, sounds nicer for what I'm trying to achieve here. And I also want to raise the volume a bit, and I like the soft clipping of this plugin, so I will turn it on and adjust the volumes, the parameters now. Makes them really poppy. I like it, but I will turn down the dry wet a bit. Those are really extreme settings, and I want kind of like a New York dry wet kind of, I don't know what it's called, but I think it's called New York compression if it's like dry wet. Adjusted. So we have this. Just makes it pop ever so slightly more. Really like it, and now I feel there's still some rumbliness here, so I want to EQ adjust it. Yeah, I'm also giving it a high pass because it's too boomy like this. So slight attenuation and high pass filtering here. also want to bring up the high frequency content a bit. Got a shelf filter. Not too much. Oversampling's on. So without the effect. Boomy and not transienty without. And really snappy with. So I like it. Good for me now. Okay, let's continue with the bass. I will do some heavy lifting, some heavy carving here. Because now the bass really sits on top of everything and sounds kind of awkward. So let me get the dynamic EQ though. Because I don't want to duck away too much. Gonna leave it at the low band again. Yeah, really just the low frequencies. And set up the sidechain, of course. Gonna find it here. Keeping it subtle. We already have 8 dB of gain reduction, so So if you focus on the low end, it's way more coherent like this, with the compressor on versus off. Especially the wobbly bass, which is this one. It's getting ducked. It's also playing around the kick drum, so this is an improvement. And let me check. Can turn the other bands on again. Yeah, and I also want an EQ on here. I'm still not happy with this like sustainy scrubby part. Dip it a bit here. And I want to bring up the low, mid, high lows a bit. Make it sound better on small speakers, because this is easy to hear on headphones or on a big system, but on a small speaker I think it's lacking the low mids, high lows. So I'm bringing those up a bit again. And also because this is really low end heavy, I'm gonna cut the lows. Also because of the compression, it will introduce distortion, so this is a good idea in this case. I think I'm quite happy with it now. Let me turn it on and off for you. Bit more coherent. I like what I hear, so we can move on to the synths. So in the Synth Group, I feel the levels are quite alright already. So I'm just gonna cut the lows in this case, because there's a lot of junk flying around. And yeah, all the elements in here, I don't think they're supposed to play a bass melody or rhythm. Like the 100 Hz stuff in there is already enough to complement the rhythm in the lows and the grooviness. So for me, yeah, really simple. That's gonna do it. Yeah, I could consider boosting like the upper mids a bit. I think this is working well, and that is pretty much it. So for this track, the most carving and adjusting was done in the individual groups. The buses really just are fine-tuning and adding the cherry on top. So let me turn it all off again, show you without and with the bus processing to compare. Especially on the drums, you can really feel the difference. Then the bass line. And the synths. And that's gonna do it. always double check everything on the master too with like tools like audio spectrum analyzers, but those can be deceiving. They use FFT, fast Fourier transformation, to display everything, and while they can give you a rough idea of how loud certain sounds are at certain frequencies, it's not always the best to rely on it. I try to use my ears as much as possible because, yeah, it's basically just a snapshot. It's really hard to visualize the difference timing makes, like compressors and stuff like that. So in my opinion, it's always the best idea to use those tools for a certain purpose. So compressors change timing, they change the shape of transients. So if you want something to be more snappy, you use a compressor. I don't think it's necessarily good to have a rule like you have to compress everything or you need to use this and that. For example, like here I just felt the drums are too boomy and sloppy, so I want to bring them together. The transients pop, EQ the parts I don't like, and that's the way I work. So yeah, this is the track. I hope you liked it. I hope you all learned something new. I hope you can take away some nice tips from this project. And also I hope you like it. I will play the whole project for you now. And yes, I really hope you liked my feature for Production Music Live. Thank you for letting me do this. And feel free to check out my stuff if you like this. Check out Jonas Saalbach, check out the sample packs. I've used it in many of my tracks. I'm a hardcore user